It's time for a new update on how the war is going. These videos where I give an overview of the front lines have turned out to be popular, and a lot has happened since my last update. In fact, I think the war has entered into a whole new phase, and that the pattern we've seen since, say, April is now being replaced by something else. So let's talk about it. As usual, I'm going to use maps from the Institute for the Study of War, and if we start in the north, then the situation is pretty much unchanged. Belarus is still conducting military exercises in the border region, and there is sort of a looming threat that Belarus might engage directly in the war and open up a new front. I still think it's unlikely, because I don't think it would work out well for them. But of course, we can never say never, and the presence of these Belarusian forces is tying up a lot of Ukrainian soldiers along the border because they have to be ready for an attack from the north. Then we get to the Sumy area. The situation here is also pretty much unchanged. There is some occasional shelling across the border, but it doesn't seem that there's going to be major fighting in this area in the near future. So all in all, in the northern area, things are mostly unchanged, and this is really not where the big stuff is happening right now. Next, I want to jump to the southern sector. I think this is the area that is driving the developments right now, so it makes sense to look at this before we get to Donbass. Ukraine has for several months talked about a big counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast, which is the western part of the southern sector. And clearly the fighting is intensifying in this area. But before we get to that, let's just look at the geography. Kherson Oblast is the area that is immediately north of Crimea, and it stretches westward. The most significant feature in the oblast is that it's divided by the Dnipro River. The city of Kherson is located just at the mouth of the river, and it is one of the very important Ukrainian ports to the Black Sea. And the city itself is located on the western bank of the river, and it is in this area that Ukraine has announced that they are going to have a counteroffensive and that they are going to liberate Kherson. So let's zoom in a bit. The area west of Dnipro is in itself a clearly defined area. It is a fairly small area that Russia controls. It's about 160 kilometers long, but it's quite narrow. And this whole area is connected to the rest of the Russian-controlled area by just a few bridges across the Dnipro. But in addition to that, the area is also divided by the Inhulets River, which is also a pretty big river. And this means that Kherson city is actually located in this corner. The area that Russia occupies here is quite small, and it's hard to support for the Russians because the logistics depend on a few bridges that are vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. So if we look at the bridges, then there are 3 bridges across Dnipro in this area. There is the Antonovsky Bridge in Kherson. It's an impressive bridge that is more than a kilometer long. Then a little further east, there is the Antonovsky Railway Bridge. And Ukraine has destroyed both of these bridges with long-range precision missiles. It's probably mostly HIMARS, but it could also be Tochka-U being in play there. And then further north, there is the Novokakhovka Dam, where there is also a crossing. So this dam is very important. If it is destroyed, then Kherson will be flooded. So Ukraine can't target it too much, but they have managed to hit the bridge and to limit the usability. And then across the Inhulets River, the most important bridge is the Darivka Bridge, and Ukraine has also destroyed that. So the situation is that Ukraine has basically destroyed all the bridges that Russia needs to supply Kherson. So what Russia has done is that they have tried to set up some pontoon bridges, I think mostly without success because the current is very strong. And then the Russian army has improvised a ferry connection with some boats that can carry a few trucks. And then Ukraine has also targeted Russian ammunition depots and command and control structures in the area. So it's obviously a vulnerable situation for Russia, and they are not going to just give up Kherson. So they have started to reinforce the area. There are different estimates of this, but there might be up to some 25,000 Russian soldiers in this area west of Dnipro right now. That's a lot. And I think the Russians have realized that they can't just defend. They need to push the Ukrainians back for this to be sustainable in the long run. So we basically have two sides that both want to be on the offensive in this area. And then the obvious question is, of course, how is it going? Who's winning? And the honest answer is that we don't know. Because we don't get a lot of information about the fighting in this area. The Ukrainians have said that they don't want to tell any details, and the Russians aren't really very informative either. I think generally, if Russia were making progress, then they would probably tell us about it. But if they're struggling, then that's not really something that the Russian Defense Ministry is bragging about in their media briefings. So what I will say is that I don't think Russia is winning at the moment. But aside from that, I think we should be careful about making conclusions about how it's going in this area right now. Okay, let's move on to Donbass. Here there is also quite a new situation. For months, the picture has been that Russia has focused on making territorial gains in the northern part of this area. So especially they have been attacking towards Slavyansk from Izium. But this has almost stopped. In fact, Russia has moved forces away from this area, and we have seen Ukraine have some success with counterattacks, and they have taken back some territory. And also further east, after Russia conquered Lysychansk, they started pushing toward the city of Siversk, but this has also largely stopped. Instead, we see that Russia is pushing further south. They are now pushing really hard on the villages that are just west of Donetsk city. And this is where Ukraine has some of their strongest defensive lines. And they have managed to push the Ukrainians back a little bit in some areas. So also in Donbass, there is a new pattern where we are seeing something that is different from the last 4 months or so. Russia is still pushing very hard towards the city of Bakhmut, so that's sort of an old thing. So there is some continuity, but this is very much the Wagner group actually up there around Bakhmut, so it's soldiers from a private military company. But one very notable thing that we've seen is that Russia have been moving soldiers out of Donbass over the last weeks, especially to the south, but also somewhat to the Kharkiv area. So it looks like they have changed their focus and that they want to see if they will have better luck with offensives in other areas, because frankly, it did look like they were somewhat stuck in Donbass. There really wasn't very much movement when they were pushing for Slavyansk or Siversk, so it makes sense that they want to try something different. Before I get to the overall picture, I should also just cover the Kharkiv area. Things haven't changed so much, so both sides are pushing and there is fighting back and forth, but there are indications that Russia is going to try something bigger here in the coming time. Especially they might want to try to push west from Izium. And the Ukrainian defense is strong around Kharkiv, so it will be difficult, and it would probably mostly be an attack that would be sort of intended to tie up some Ukrainian forces, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so what is the big picture? I think it's fair to say that the war has entered into a new phase. I would say that this is the third phase so far. The first one was the first month where Russia was sort of pushing all over the place and they were still going for Kiev. And then since April, there has been a second phase where the main area of fighting has been Donbass. And now we have entered into a third phase where the focus is much broader again. There are things happening on a much broader part of the front line. The first two phases were obviously initiated by Russia, so they took place because Russia decided so. But the third phase here is taking place because Russia has to react to something that Ukraine is doing. they have to stop Ukraine from taking back Kherson. And for that reason, I think that there is now a question as to whether Russia is losing the strategic initiative here. So there is a fight for that. It looks like both sides are fighting about who should make the choices about time and space for the battles. And Ukraine has made the decision that the fighting should now be happening around Kherson, and Russia has then decided to push into the southern part of Donetsk because they want fighting to be happening there. And right now it's uncertain how this will play out. And in general, we should be careful about reading too much into current events, because in a war, we can very often only in hindsight see where the turning points were. But I will say that the current situation has the ingredients that could make it a turning point. So that is one thing to watch in the coming time, whether Ukraine will be able to seize and hold the strategic initiative so that they will make the decisions about time and space for the battles and Russia will have to respond, or whether Russia will come up with something so that they can get the initiative back. And that sort of leads me to another point that I think is important. I think we need to recognize how dangerous the situation is for the Russian forces around Kherson. This is not just a normal battle. When we look at the geography of this area around Kherson, then it has the potential of what the Germans call a Kesselschlacht. It literally means a cauldron battle, which basically just means that you have encircled the enemy, but German is just a fantastic language for military terminology, so I like the German word. So the point of a Kesselschlacht is that you have encircled a group of enemy forces and you have cut them off from supplies or being reinforced, and then you basically turn up the heat until the water in the cauldron begins to boil. And you basically, this way, annihilate an entire group of the enemy's forces. And I don't know whether Ukraine has the ability to pull this off, but it's a possibility. If Ukraine can control the Russian supply lines across the rivers, then this could become a Kesselschlacht. So I think Russia has a pretty short window of opportunity to secure this area. And if they aren't able to do that within, say, a couple of weeks, then I think these Russian soldiers could be in big trouble. And again, we should be careful about making these predictions about tactical outcomes, because they're very often wrong, or things look more important than they are in the big perspective. But when I look at what's happening around Kherson, then it looks to me like Ukraine is trying to stage a decisive battle in the war in an area where they have all the advantages. So we'll see if they can pull it off. Okay, I'm going to end it here. If you found the video interesting, be sure to give it a like. That will promote the video on YouTube so more people can see it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.